and he just like stopped it.
Welcome back to our second Thursday college meeting. It's great to see some of you who are grateful in person, and then hello to everyone else who's on the live stream. It's super exciting that you are here. Whether it's your first time here or you have been employed last week or we've done a meeting, welcome, big welcome to everyone. My name is Rachel, and I currently have the pleasure of serving as the EU's treasurer this year. And I also just in 4th year studying animal science. And I will be leading us in our public meeting today. In a moment, we'll read the Bible together, and then we'll hear from one of our EU staff as well, and we'll spend some time praying. But first, we're going to hear a bit more about this community. So, if you have been invited to invite a friend today, or you're just a returning EUer, we're really excited that you are here. I'm going to do hope that you enjoy your time with us. Public meetings are run by the EU, which is the Evangelical Union, which is one of the Christian groups here in Sydney. And each week we kind of meet together and we have a talk from the Bible. They will start with some announcements, and then we'll have a Bible reading and Bible and prayer. I think first start with a video.
Hi there. Welcome to the Sydney Uni EU. We're so glad you're here. We're a big group of students who believe that Jesus is the most important person who has ever lived, and he is Lord. We believe that Jesus
Hi there.
lived the life of
Welcome to the Sydney Uni EU. We're so glad you're here. We're a big group of students who believe that Jesus is the most important person who has ever lived, and he is Lord. We believe that Jesus came to live the life of love that we failed to live, and he died in our place for our sins, and on the 3rd day he rose from the dead to live and to reign forever. And one day he'll come back, and everything bad will disappear, and everything good will be made new. You may or may not believe these things, but if they are true, then they change everything. This is important news, and it's good news. This good news is the reason why the EU exists. Our hope is that we can be a place where newcomers are always welcome, no matter who you are. Whether you follow Jesus or not, we hope you find a warm and welcoming community where you can make friends and learn from the Bible. Our desire is that each person grows spiritually to become more and more like Jesus. And we do this by reading and learning from the Bible together and allowing it to shape and direct our lives. Our ambition is to be a servant-hearted, outward-looking community, a place where people look for ways to serve and love the world with the gospel and with all the gifts God has given us. So whoever you are, welcome. We hope you'll join us. Hi there.
A variety of courses on different ministry skills and Christian understandings. Training is one of our 3 main activities that the EU is trying to get everyone part of. And it will just basically equip you with the skills that you might want to use within the EU, at your church, and even beyond. Hopefully setting you up for a lifetime of service. We highly encourage you to join and get involved in one of these courses. It'll be a great opportunity. This semester, the weekly courses that are running are Getting Life Sorted for the first years, Teaching the Bible for assistant small group leaders, and anyone else who wants to get involved with learning how to read the Bible better and to teach better. And then we're engaging with Muslims, ethics, and cross cultures. And these courses will be running on Tuesday and Wednesday from 9 a.m. or 3 to 4 p.m. And they will begin next week. You can sign up now on the sydneyunieu.org website, which is up there. /training, and just go to that training section and sign up for that. There will also 2 one-day intensive quick courses on Monday, the 20th of June. This is the first week of the mid-year break, or the first Monday of the mid-year break. And the courses are making life decisions and working in God's will. For more detail on the various quick courses, definitely go visit that website or contact your family leaders for any questions. If you haven't been connected with a small group yet, I want to encourage you to join one. Small groups are great. They're great times to meet together in person more happily and study God's word more in depth. If you have any questions, the staff and faculty leaders would absolutely love to hear from you, so you get in contact. Now, as a way, yes. We would love you to scan the QR code. Father, thank you for this week's public meeting, that we get to hear your word preached openly. We pray for Rowan that you will use him to share your word faithfully with us, and that you will be opening our hearts to receive your message. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Michelle is now going to come up and read the Bible for us.
Hi guys, my name is Michelle and I will be doing the Bible reading for today. So in the EU, we believe that the Bible is God's living word and that it is also written by humans and also divinely inspired by God. We also believe that all scripture is God-breathed and that it is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. And that is from 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. And so now I will read the Bible. So if you have a Bible or a device, if you could turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and we will read from verses 17 to 25. Okay, so starting from verse 17, for Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom and eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength.
Well done. You've made it to the EU public meeting amidst the crazy weather this week. And if you're on the live stream, glad you could join us this Thursday here in Nanoscience. We're going to talk today about this particular topic. You can see up behind me, how to gain wisdom. So just to get our heads in the right space, I want you to just to chat to the person around you, or if you're just at home, you and the cat, then it'll be maybe a one-sided conversation, not to diminish the intelligence or the wisdom of your cat. But have a chat about this. Who's the smartest person you know or have known? And what makes you say they're so smart? Have a bit of a think and a bit of a share with the person next to you. I'll give you about a minute. Okay. Well, if you are on the live stream and your cat talked back to you just then, maybe that cat is the smartest being on the planet. But anyone just in the room, just if you were impressed by either the smartest person you'd ever met or maybe the person who you were chatting with, they'd met a really smart person, I'd love to just hear, who is the smartest person that you've known? Any suggestions? Yeah. Year 10 history teacher. Why did you think they were so smart? Yes, photographic memory certainly gives you the impression of sort of knowing a lot, doesn't it? But I mean, really, it's just being able to remember what's on a page. Does that make you smart? I mean, I don't know. If you hang around at Sydney Uni for long enough, as I have, you're blessed to be able to meet lots of smart people. I remember chatting to a woman who was doing honours in a mathematical science area, and just chatting to her, and I said, "Oh, what you got?" She said, "I have to go home and do some work for uni," and I said, "Oh, what would you have to do?" And she said, "Oh, I've got to write a proof for my supervisor tomorrow. He wants me to prove this thing." And I said, "Oh, right. Well, how long is that, a page or something?" She said, "Oh, it'll be about a 20-page proof. I'm just going to go home, dash that off." And I just remember going, okay, there's just a level of intelligence there that maybe I just don't share. Another guy who, I went to school with a guy who didn't place in the top 10 in the state in the HSC. He didn't place in the top 5. He got the highest mark in the HSC in the state. And we didn't think he was that clever, actually, at school, but clearly he was. We were the ones who were not very smart at that particular point. We couldn't see the signs. Anyway, what we're going to think about today is, how do you gain real wisdom? That's the question we're going to explore today. Now that international travel's opened up, if you wanted to, you could go to the National Museum of American History in Washington, DC. There's a picture of it up on the screen. And if you're there, you'll find this inscription. It's a statement by Joseph Henry, who is the first secretary of the Smithsonian Institute. He made it in the 1800s. It captures much of what we call now the Enlightenment spirit. I put a few little quotes up there on the screen, but let me read to you the whole statement. He says, "Modern civilization depends on science. James Smithson was well aware that knowledge should not be viewed as existing in isolated parts, but as a whole, each portion of which throws light on all the others, and that the tendency of all is to improve the human mind and give it new sources of power and enjoyment. Narrow minds think nothing of importance but their own favourite pursuit. But liberal views exclude no branch of science or literature, for they all contribute to sweeten, to adorn, and to embellish life. Science is the pursuit above all which impresses us with the capacity of man for intellectual and moral progress, and awakens the human intellect to aspiration for a higher condition of humanity." It's evidence of just a great belief in the power of the human mind. Here is the Enlightenment humanist project literally carved into the walls of one of our great institutions, that in the gaining of human wisdom, we can improve the human condition, that we can somehow gain power and make real, he says, moral progress. And you've come to this university to study, the oldest tertiary institution in the country, dedicated to the passing on of human wisdom and learning. Sydney Uni, you might not realise, is one of the great repositories of human knowledge, certainly in this country. You ever been to Fisher Library? I mean, you could actually be at Sydney University for a whole degree and never step foot inside Fisher Library, but that's what it looks like if you've passed it by. How many physical volumes, physical books, do you reckon Fisher Library might hold? 1 million? I mean, that'd be pretty impressive. 2 million? The answer is 5.2 million physical volumes. That's not counting the over 300,000 ebooks and another 100,000 journals. But our university is not just a great repository of human knowledge, it's also one of the foremost places in Australia where the envelope of human understanding is being pushed back, where the frontiers of human knowledge are expanding. According to the latest figures I could find, in 1 year, academics from Sydney Uni published 378 books in 1 year. That's 7 books coming out every week from this place. In addition to that, another 2,770 journal articles. That's another 53 journal articles every week being churned out by the academics from Sydney Uni. Just on the numbers alone, you have come to one of the high towers of human knowledge and wisdom. And presumably, you've come along to get a little bit of that wisdom for yourself. Enough at least to get a degree. Enough to secure you a decent job with reasonable prospects. If I'm just being honest, I've just not met many students who've come to Sydney Uni purely for the joy of learning, purely just to become wise. We want some wisdom, but we want wisdom as a means to an end. And I want to circle back to that a bit later on. Mind you, Sydney Uni is only a bit of a bit player, really, in the global quest for wisdom. Each year, I'm told there's somewhere between 1.8 million and 2.5 million peer-reviewed journal articles published every year. 2.5 million of them every year. And that number apparently is growing by an extra 60,000 every year on top of the base number. Or to pick just one field in chemistry, they estimate, they don't even really know, but they estimate 500,000 articles per year are published in chemistry alone. We human beings, if you like, are constructing a great tower, a great huge edifice called knowledge. We're building massive ivory towers of human wisdom and understanding. And yet God, and when I say God, I mean the Christian understanding of God as the one true living God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth as recorded for us in the Christian Bible. This one true and living God, he says, and you can see it on the screen, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Here is God's public policy. He's going to destroy the so-called wisdom of the wise. Not a secret plan. He's declared it publicly. This God, the only God who really exists, he's going to destroy the wisdom of the wise. Now, we need to think carefully about this before we leap to any wrong conclusions. Does this mean that God is sort of against wisdom? Is he against human understanding? Is he against the whole academic endeavour? What about all the good things that have come from human knowledge and understanding? All the improvements in health and education? Is God anti-science? Is he anti-progress? Does he want us, respectfully, to live like the Amish? Is that what he wants? The answer is no. We're to rejoice and give thanks to God, actually, for all the improvements in our lives because of human knowledge, because of the capacity he's given us to push back that frontier of understanding. God's not anti-university. He's not anti-learning or anti-libraries, or sadly, he's not even anti-exams. I'm sure you wish he was. The problem with worldly wisdom is in its arrogant ignoring of God. Worldly wisdom says, I don't need God. We can work out everything ourselves. God has no place in this picture, in this truth that I'm putting forward. God is excluded from the picture. Whereas a Christian perspective from the Bible is that actually all truth is God's truth, because all the world is God's. He's its creator, he's its sustainer, and ultimately he tells us he's its judge and its rebuilder. That's why the Bible teaches repeatedly that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. So the starting point for true wisdom is the fear of the Lord, a reverent acknowledgement of him. Without that foundation, you can know lots of true things about, I don't know, the economy or history or educational theory or the mating rituals of New Zealand swamp rats. You can know lots of true stuff, but you won't know the thing that really matters and that actually holds it all together. You won't know God. And so God's publicly stated policy is that he will destroy this worldly wisdom, this wisdom that excludes God, that tries to proceed without him, and which is actually therefore the height of human arrogance. Well, how will God see through this policy? Because I can think of a few cool ways that God could choose to destroy the wisdom of the wise. He could send down a giant foot out of the sky and smash the stack of Fisher Library into the ground. Now, that would be very impressive. It would probably get the university's attention. Or he could develop a perfect computer virus that could take down every single page on the web. Every page. Well, there would go a whole lot of wisdom and a whole lot of rubbish, all sort of gone in one fell swoop. But the interesting thing is that when you dig into what God actually says here in the Bible, it's not a plan that he has for the future. It's actually revealed as something he's already achieved in the past. He's already destroyed the wisdom of the wise. Makes you go, well, hang on, when did he do that? Well, we need to look a bit more carefully at what God says here in the Bible to understand what he's telling us. And the statement from God with which we've started comes in the New Testament, the Christian Bible, in a letter called 1 Corinthians, written in the 1st century AD by the Apostle Paul, who was an eyewitness to Jesus' resurrection from the dead. And he wrote it to a bunch of Christians living in a real place called Corinth, the ruins of which you can still find today if you travel to Greece. If you were here last week, then you'll know that the Corinthian Christians, instead of living for God in the way that he'd asked them to and called them to, they'd instead retained a lot of the worldly values of their surrounding Corinthian culture. And in particular, they'd taken on the worldly values of wisdom from their culture. And that worldly value of wisdom esteemed things like fancy debating styles or impromptu speeches and clever rhetoric. And they'd walked those values into their church gathering, and they were now assessing their different Christian leaders based on those worldly values of impressive rhetorical displays. So the Apostle Paul writes to them to help them see this mistake that they're making. And he does that by explaining that God's public policy with regard to worldly wisdom, namely, he's already exposed the folly, the foolishness of human wisdom. Where has he done that? Well, as we'll see in a moment, he's done that in the death of Jesus on the cross. This is the big point in the passage that we had read for us at the beginning from 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Let me put two verses up on the screen for you to look at. This is verses 20 and 21 out of the reading that we had. You can see there in verse 20, Paul asks rhetorically, has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? The answer being, yes, he has. He has made foolish the wisdom of the world. The wise one, the scribe, the debater of this age, their foolishness has already been exposed, even though they continue to argue and pontificate. But how? How has God exposed the foolishness of their wisdom? So what I want you to do is have a bit of a look at these two verses on the screen there, or if you've got a Bible in front of you, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 20 and 21. Discuss it maybe with the person next to you. How has God, according to these verses, how has God exposed the foolishness of worldly wisdom? Have a bit of a chat. So if you've had a bit of a read of those verses, how has God exposed the foolishness of the so-called wise? I think the answer is there in verse 21. Despite their great learning and their wisdom, they still have not known God. That's how God has defeated the worldly wisdom of every age, their day as in ours. He does not make himself known through mere human intellectual activity. Imagine just for a moment the whole of humanity gathered together into one great tower, but ordered according to their academic achievement. Notice I'm not saying intelligence, because intelligence and academic achievement can be very, very different. There are a lot of intelligent people in the world who've never been blessed with the same opportunities that you and I have had to achieve academically. But let's just, for the sake of the exercise, let's think about it in terms of just academic achievement. There at the bottom is the great tragedy of 20% of the world's population who've never had the opportunity to learn to read and write. 1 in 5. And then you move up to all of those who've been blessed with a primary school education. And then there's the smaller group who've been privileged to have a secondary education. And then you can reach I think it's 31% of Australians who've had the good fortune under God to have a tertiary level education. And one day, hopefully, you too will be part of that 31%. You will get your tertiary degree. But then you keep going, right? Then there's the few who've had a postgraduate education, or the scholars, or the academics, all of those who are producing the books and the papers from Sydney University. And they're right at the top are the select few. The Newtons, the Einsteins, the Mozarts, the Shakespeares, the Rembrandts, all reaching up to grab hold of God. God, the only God who truly is. He looks down at it all. He just says, no. You are not going to know me that way. That's how he shows the foolishness of worldly wisdom, the wisdom that tries to exclude him from the picture. He chooses to not reveal himself through human academic intellectual achievement. Let me give you an example. If you want to appear learned, here's one way you can do it. Write a book and then give it a very, very scary, impressive title. I came across this book in a library, and it has a very intimidating title. Mathematical Undecidability, Quantum Non-Locality, and the Question of the Existence of God. Honestly, it sounds like you've got to have several PhDs just to read the contents page, probably, of this book. It's so intimidating. What it is in this book, a whole bunch of very serious scholars are exploring deep ideas in mathematics and physics. Things like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and Gödel's incompleteness theorems. And they try to establish, what do these ideas at the very forefront of human understanding, what do these ideas tell us about the existence of God? And the answer, when you wade through all of their great learning, not much. Maybe there is space for God. That's about the best conclusion they come up with. You know nothing about his existence. You know nothing about what he's like from these deep understandings, these deep learnings. This is how God has destroyed the seeming wisdom of the wise by not allowing himself to be discovered, revealed through human academic achievement. However, God has not left himself hidden. It's just that he hasn't chosen to reveal himself through intellectual achievement. He has, in fact, revealed himself to anyone who actually cares to know. Go back to the very verses that we had a moment ago. What does he say here? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. God makes himself known to all people everywhere through this message about Jesus. A message that seems to be foolish because it's about a guy, Jesus, who died on a cross. Yet it's through this message of the cross that God makes himself known in the world. And this knowledge of God is not the preserve of the powerful, the academically privileged. It's available to anyone who believes it. Now, rightly, we hate the privilege that comes to the elite, except for the fact that we are the elite because we're here at university. So aside from that, we hate the privilege that comes to others who are elite. Why should the rich or the powerful, the socially advantaged, why should they get even more while the rest miss out? Well, God agrees with that sentiment. That's not how it is with God. His public policy is actually to frustrate the wisdom of the wise, but to lift up the humble. His public policy, as we go on to read in this chapter, is lived out in the very people who follow Jesus. What I mean is, if you take a look at any gathering of Christians, followers of Jesus, look at the people who wear the green shirts walking around the campus of Sydney Uni, I don't mean to offend anyone, but you're not going to see a bunch of super impressive people. Because, as Paul says later in that very chapter, God hasn't chosen the wise or the powerful or those of exalted social standing. Quite the contrary. He says he's chosen the lowly, the weak, the foolish. And he grants them his spirit so that they might believe this message about Jesus. And he does so to compound the shame of the wise and the strong. Think again about that great tower of human academic achievement. There at the top of the tower are some of the great minds of the world, the great Richard Dawkins of the world, who in their arrogant foolishness are proclaiming there is no God. We've reached, we've looked, there's nothing. And yet, in that same tower, there are children, teenagers, illiterate millions, actually, in the 2/3 world, who under the hand of God and the guidance of his Spirit have heard about this Jesus and his death on the cross, and they've believed. There is the wisdom of God at work, shaming the wise and the strong and the powerful, yet revealing himself to the ones that the world ignores. Of course, there are many educated and intelligent people too who've been similarly blessed by God and his Spirit, who've also come to believe. But really, that's the point. It's not about how intelligent or wise you are in any worldly standard. It's about whether you've chosen to believe this message or not. So let's press down into this message about Jesus and his death, because according to this passage, it is not just where God shows his wisdom, it's also where he shows his power. God does something through this message for those who believe it. And honestly, if you believe this message, without exaggeration, it will transform you if you believe this message. Have a look at the next few sentences of this passage, which is up on the screen. It says there, Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. The heart of what Paul has to say to these Christians is about Jesus' death. As you're no doubt aware, Jesus was executed by the Romans in about 30 AD by crucifixion. He was hung on a cross until he died. It was a particularly gruesome form of execution, reserved for the lowest of the lows. It was excruciatingly painful and degrading, so much so that actually it was regarded as too offensive to mention in polite conversation. You just never mention crucifixion. So that Jesus died on the cross, first of all, that's a historical fact. If you're not sure about that, then I encourage you to read one of the accounts of Jesus' life and teaching and death and resurrection you can find in the Christian Bible, one of the gospel accounts. But if you wanted to make the Christian message more palatable, more attractive, you would be sorely tempted to sort of not make much of the way Jesus died, because that's going to be a bit of a problem for people as you try to share the Christian message. But Paul says, we proclaim Christ crucified, even though that's a stumbling block to the Jews and regarded as foolishness by the Gentiles, the non-Jews who heard it. It was tricky for the Jews because for them, Christ was the title of their victorious king. Christ crucified, well, that's not a victorious king, that's a failure. So that was a stumbling block to them. They couldn't get their minds around it. It was oxymoronic. It made no sense to them. For the non-Jewish Gentiles, it similarly just seemed as foolishness. You're telling me that this man, executed by the Romans as a criminal in a very degrading fashion, that he's now king over all, that he's now lord over all. That just seemed like utter foolishness. It's ridiculous. To illustrate the point, maybe here's a bit of graffiti found from the 2nd century that makes fun of Christians. The idea of worshipping a crucified God was about as sensible as worshipping a donkey in their mind. These Christians, their message about a Christ crucified, it's just ridiculous. The message of the cross came across as foolishness in the 1st century. If it's not regarded as foolish today, I think it's certainly probably written off as irrelevant. It's just got nothing to do with me. Yet we're told here that this is not just God's wisdom that exposes the foolishness of those who might write it off as irrelevant, but actually it's God's power through which he achieves something wonderful for you and for me. So how is this message about Jesus' death actually God's power? What does God achieve through Jesus' death on the cross? Well, Paul mentions it a bit further on in chapter 1, verse 30. I'll put it up on the screen. He says, "It is because of God that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, sanctification, and redemption." Paul uses 3 technical religious words here to summarize what God achieves in the death of Jesus: righteousness, sanctification, and redemption. In fact, it's not just a summary of what God achieves, it's a summary of what God offers you, of what he offers any person as a gift for believing this message about Jesus. So like we have to do with any sort of technical words, let's sort of flesh it out a little bit so we can understand it. First of all, righteousness. Righteousness means right standing with God. The reality is our arrogant ignoring of God has put us offside with God. The Bible is very clear. The one God who truly exists, he made you. And he sustains your every breath. He knows the number of hairs, we're told, on your head. Not impressive in my case, but in yours, that's an impressive fact. He knows you that intimately. He loves you. This is who he is in relation to you. And yet, the fact that we keep telling him to stuff off, we're just not interested in him having anything to do with our lives. We are, if you like, the petulant teenager who runs off with the parents' car keys, takes the car out for a spin, leaves Macca's wrappers strewn throughout the vehicle, comes back home, crashes it into the garage, leaves the engine running, the lights on, and throws the keys into the garden. That's us with respect to God. We care not what he thinks, and we just live our lives our own way. That puts us offside with God. The Bible says we've actually, by our ignoring of God and just ignoring of his word and his ways, that we have made ourselves, declared ourselves to be his enemies. And the Bible is very clear, there will come a day when we will all each stand before him to give an account of the life that he's blessed us with. And let me say, on that day, you will really wish for right standing with him. No matter of what your great learning, no matter how impressive your accomplishments, no matter how wonderfully you can play the piano, no matter how much great philanthropy you've done, no matter what it is, he won't earn you right standing. But he wants to gift it to you. He wants to give you the right standing that you can't earn yourself. That's what he's done in Jesus' death on the cross. Jesus dies taking the punishment for our smashing of their car. Right? He takes all the penalty for the way we've wrecked our relationship with the one true God, that you can have right standing. He offers it to you as a gift for anyone who would accept this message about the crucified Jesus and believe. That's righteousness, right standing with God. Secondly, he says sanctification. Sanctification, as you can see there, means being cleansed by God for God. When our kids were in primary school one day, I took them down to, they were in primary school and it was pouring with rain, a bit like this week, not quite as bad as this week, but it was raining a lot. The local park, the middle of the park had just been turned into basically mud. We took them down there one day in the pouring rain and just said, see the mud? Go. And they just had a fantastic time playing in the mud. They just got complete, and it was a great idea. It was just a great memory, as they say, whatever. Anyway, the thing I didn't actually realise was just how difficult it is to actually get mud out of clothes. This was a learning for me, because no matter how much I tried to clean some of their clothes, I was never able to get the mud out, ever. Unintended consequence and cost of the day is great fun, maybe. But that mud that sticks that you can't get rid of, that's all the things that you and I do that we really regret. That's all the people that we've hurt when we wish we hadn't. That's all the people that we should have helped, but we sort of couldn't be bothered. That's what the Bible calls sin, the way we hurt and damage each other, let alone the ways we actually reject God and his ways and his word. That's the mud that sticks to us, that you just can't get rid of. How do I take back things that I've done? You can't. But what God promises is he can wash you clean. He can actually wash you completely clean, white as snow, he says in the Bible. He offers you sanctification, cleansed by him for relationship with him. That's what he offers. And thirdly, he offers us redemption. To be redeemed is to be rescued from what keeps you trapped. Sadly, we are all addicted to self-destructive behaviours in all sorts of different ways. We're trapped in ways that aren't God's ways, and we end up in empty dissatisfaction and destruction. But through Jesus' death, God offers us freedom from that slavery to selfishness and to sin, so that we can know the life that he says is truly life in relationship with him, knowing him and being known by him. That is the power of God that's displayed in Jesus' death, because there he secures right standing with him. That's where he secures cleansing for us, for himself. That's where he rescues us from all that keeps us trapped in empty self-destruction. When Paul wants to sum up this picture, he calls it being saved. This is God's power at work, saving those who without it are actually perishing. So let's return to where we started. Who's the smartest person you know? How do you know they're smart? Well, the smartest people in the world are those who humbly believe this message about Jesus. They're the ones who are truly wise. Paul makes a very clear appeal to the Corinthians on this question, which we need to hear ourselves. He said, do not be deceived. If any of you think you are wise by the standards of this age, you should become fools so that you may become wise. Become a fool. Embrace this seemingly foolish message about the crucified Jesus, but who's now been raised to life again as your Lord. The world, your parents, your friends, they may say you're crazy if you accept this message, that you're giving your life away. But remember God's promise. He promises to save those who believe, to grant you righteousness and sanctification and redemption. It doesn't depend on your IQ or your academic transcript. God promises to save those who believe, who put their day-by-day trust in Jesus and this message about him. So don't put it off. It's a change you can make today. You can make it this afternoon. So if you'd like to start believing, to start enjoying the right standing and the cleansing and the rescue that he offers you, then please come and speak to me about it today, or speak to one of your EU friends or someone in a green EU shirt. Keep coming to EU public meetings. Even if you're not ready to make that chance today, keep investigating. Read one of the accounts of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection in the New Testament. The EU would love to meet up with you, to answer your questions, or to just read one of those New Testament Gospels with you together. And so in a moment, I'll put back up the QR code. That's the digital communication card. And you can just use that to get us the messages and say, I'd like to find out more about Jesus. I'd like to talk to someone about what we've heard about today. And I'll hang around for lunch today as well.
Rachel and the leaders. So we praying response for her, also for Samuel and Emily, who are missionaries in Portugal, so they're seeking to serve in university ministry. And just some background about Portugal. About 80% of the population are Roman Catholic, but many don't attend church regularly. And secularism is very much on the rise in Portugal, and there's a lack of Bible-believing churches. So we pray for that. Also pray for the situation in Ukraine. So please pray with me. Lord God, thank you for freeing us from the law of sin and death by sending your own Son as a sacrifice for us. We praise you for not leaving us alone in darkness, but for giving us the free gift of eternal life in Jesus. Thank you that it is by your grace that you have saved us through faith. Thank you for the blessing of the EU and all those involved who have the desire to see your name proclaimed in all the earth. Heavenly Father, we know that whoever believes in Jesus has eternal life, but whoever does not obey him will not see life. But Lord, how can people call on the name of Jesus if they have not heard? And how can they hear about him without someone preaching to them? God, we long to see all people of all nations come to know you. We lift up Sam and Emily. We thank you for the work they are doing in Portugal, and we ask that you continue to sustain them through your Holy Spirit and your grace. We ask that your Spirit will be preparing hearts of the people in Portugal to hear and see the good news and bear fruit. We ask that those who receive and accept the good news of Jesus will go out and share it with those around them. Lord, we know that you observe all and so we pray. For you, the conflict in Ukraine. Have mercy, we pray, on those who suffer the miseries of war and not the very making. Have compassion on the wounded and dying. Comfort the broken-hearted. Confound the hatred and madness of those who make war. Guide our rulers and bring war to an end. Please bring peace across our world. Unite us under the reign of your Son, the Prince of Peace. We pray this in Jesus' name. Rachel, just before we finish today, I just want to do a quick announcement from the public meetings team. We allow lots of people to make the public meetings happen. So we're looking for people to put out the advertising awards. I think it's the phone number that's going on the screen. Okay, I don't have the number. I'm sure you can contact someone, contact me, come stick around for lunch if you're in person, otherwise, I'm sure you can contact your faculty, I'm sure I can get you in with the right people. But essentially, you're looking for people to put out the awards in the mornings and have them in the afternoons. So if that's something that you can serve in, please let someone know. Hopefully, it's someone else that I already use to get you in contact. And if you also were interested in maybe serving, either reading the Bible or praying, just like Michelle and Rachel did for us today, we've also got some volunteers for that as well. So please get in touch. Thank you so much for coming today. It was really great that you could be here with us, and for those of us who are came on the live stream, it's great that you could join anyway. We're going to have lunch now in May, so feel free to join us if you're around. If you have any other questions today, feel free to get in contact with people around you or come join us for lunch